Today on The Way of Ramen, I get coached by one of the greatest, if not the greatest, ramen chef in the United States. This is Keizo Shimamoto teaching me how to make a double soup shoyu ramen. Let's get it. When it comes to ramen in the US, there isn't anyone quite like Keizo Shimamoto. He's widely considered by a large majority of hardcore ramen nerds in the States to be one of the best, if not the greatest ramen chef in the country. He honed his craft working at various ramen shops in Tokyo, and upon returning to the US, he invented the ultra-popular ramen burger, which landed him spots on national television. His shop, Ramen Shack, was a mecca for ramen nerds throughout the world, and people would travel large distances just to eat one of Keizo's bowls of ramen. Though his New York shop is closed forever, he's bringing the shack back later this year in Southern California. After I had Keizo on my podcast earlier this year, we started talking about a potential collab video for this channel. I challenged him to come up with a recipe for shoyu ramen that doesn't use ultra hard to find ingredients, so people who watch the video would have a good chance of making the ramen at home. This recipe is what he came up with, so let's get right into it. So this is a recipe for a double soup shoyu ramen, and just a heads up, this recipe makes a lot of soup, so you're gonna need some really big pots for this, like at least 12 quart pots, and you'll need probably a couple of them, or you'll need to scale this recipe down. Just giving you a heads up before you go out and buy all the ingredients. So unlike other videos, I think the best place to start with this recipe is the tare, because this tare is not quick. This is 600 milliliters of Marudaizu Koikuchi shoyu and 65 milliliters of Hon Mirin, the one with alcohol. I had combined these two ingredients and let them sit at room temperature like this for 1 week. Yes, you heard that correctly, 1 week. According to Keizo, there's some sort of magic that happens when you just let these two ingredients chill out together for some time, so blend it and just forget about it and come back in a week to make it. So after a week, add some kombu and shiitake to the soy mirin blend and let that steep overnight. He didn't actually give me the measurements for this, so I just did around 20 grams of kombu and 2 dried shiitake mushrooms. The next day, pour the tare into a pot and heat it up to 80 degrees Celsius. When it hits 80 degrees, remove the kombu and shiitake and then turn off the heat. Add 10 grams of the best tasting natural salt you can buy. Keizo recommends some kind of food mineral salt, but I use sea salt here. Stir that in and let it dissolve with the residual heat. When the tare is cooled to room temperature, add 20 milliliters of Thai fish sauce. And that's your first Keizo signature ingredient that you'll find in this recipe. And once your fish sauce is in, your tare is finally done and you can store this in a cool, dark place pretty much forever. Now onto the soup. So this is a double soup recipe, which means we're making a dobutsuke or animal-based soup and a dashi, and then combining the two together at the end to make your final ramen soup. The animal soup for this recipe is a chicken stock. So to get started, trim off the toenails off 5 pounds or 2.5 kilograms of chicken feet. Yes, that's a lot of chicken feet. And this is another one of Keizo's signature things. He puts a lot of chicken feet into his ramen. But anyways, to cut off the toenails, use a kitchen scissors and then snip off just the nail, and then take your scissors and cut an X into the palm of the foot. This process takes quite a while, even if you have a sharp scissors like I did, so you could even do this a day in advance because the cook time for this soup is, you guessed it, also very long. So after you get your toenails all chopped off, we're gonna prep the chickens. So we're gonna be using 2 whole chickens for this recipe because it's a lot easier to find for most people than the chicken backs. Buy the best quality chicken you can find, since this will be the main flavor for your soup. First, you're gonna reach into the cavity and remove all the guts from inside the bird. Be sure to scrape out the lungs, I think they're the lungs, or the kidneys or something. Anyways, there's some guts embedded between the ribs. Be sure to get all that out too. And once you get all the guts out, lightly rinse the inside with some running water. Next, take a sharp knife and make cuts all around the chicken. I cut along the thigh, the wings, and into the breast and back. This will help extract more flavor as you make your stock. And once you have your chicken and your chicken feet prepped, put the chickens, just the chickens, into a giant pot and add 8 to 9 liters of water. The amount of water is probably gonna change depending upon the shape of your pot, but what you wanna do is make sure your chickens are covered and you also have enough extra water above that to fit all of your chicken feet when you eventually add them in. Turn on the heat and then bring the soup to a boil. When the water is boiling, skim off the scum, and I made a mistake here and I got too anxious and I started skimming a little bit too early, which made it harder, but just wait until the scum kind of clumps together and it'll make it a lot easier to take out, but it's fine, it's still okay. And be sure to stick a wooden spoon into the chicken's butt and swirl it around a little bit and get any scum out of the inside of the birds to come up too. Once you have all the scum removed, add the chicken feet and a large handful of rinsed chicken skin. Lower the heat and bring the stock to around 95 degrees Celsius or around 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want to keep the stock just under boiling at a bare simmer. Use a thermometer with a temperature alarm for best results. Put a lid on the pot, but keep the lid slightly cracked, and then let this stock cook for a minimum of 6 hours. Keizo recommends 8 to 12 hours. If you haven't noticed, everything Keizo does takes a very, very long time, but just make sure it never boils. Keep it around 94 or 95 degrees Celsius the whole time. For the dashi portion of the soup, you want to soak 50 grams of kombu, and yes, that's a lot of kombu. Keizo actually wanted to do 100 grams of kombu, but I didn't have 100 grams of kombu on hand. And Keizo also recommends ma kombu, which I happen to have in my shop, but any good quality Japanese kombu should work, along with 25 grams of shiitake mushrooms. And let that soak overnight in the fridge. The next day, get the pot onto a stove and heat it up to 60 degrees or 140 degrees Fahrenheit. When your dashi hits 60 degrees, remove the kombu and shiitake, then bring the dashi up to 90 degrees Celsius or 194 degrees Fahrenheit. Skim off any scum that comes up as you bring your dashi temperature up. At 90 degrees Celsius, add a bag of katsuobushi. I believe this is around 65 grams of hanakatsu. If you can find atsukezuri thick cut stuff, that would be even better, but I didn't have them. And then turn off the heat and let this steep. Taste the dashi as it steeps, starting at around 5 minutes. If you oversteep katsuobushi, it can make your dashi a little bit sour, so go with your gut on this one. When it has that smoky, fishy katsuobushi flavor, you can strain it out. And that's it, your dashi is done. And I would recommend timing this dashi to be made on the same day you're gonna serve the ramen, so plan accordingly. For the aroma oil, we're actually gonna be making 2 different oils. One will be the chiyu or chicken fat that we're gonna be harvesting from the soup. And the second oil will be a vegetable oil-based shallot oil, which will also help us make a topping called agenegi. I scaled down the shallot oil recipe for my needs, but if you want to get Keizo's original amounts, just double everything. I start off by finely dicing some shallots. You're looking for about 100 grams, and they should be about this size. Then finely mince 25 grams of garlic, ginger, and the white part of green onions, 25 grams of them each. Then heat up 250 milliliters of vegetable oil in a pot and add all of your aromatics. Fry the aromatics at medium-low heat until they are almost burned and all of the moisture has evaporated away from them. This is probably the most challenging part of this recipe because if you don't fry the aromatics long enough, the oil will taste raw and pretty terrible, to be honest. And if you go too long, the oil will taste burnt. There are no timings for this, you kind of just have to watch and look and smell it. You want to also be stirring it continuously to make sure it doesn't stick and burn at the bottom. And once it hits this color, you're gonna need to watch it like a hawk because it almost instantly turns into this color, and then once it hits this color, you need to take it off the heat right away and strain it to make your oil. Use your nose and smell the oil. It should have a really nice toasty oil smell, and that's what you're looking for. Spread out the fried aromatics on a paper towel lined plate or tray and let these dry and crisp up. This is called agenegi, and you're gonna be using this as a topping as well. Okay, back to the soup. I've had the stock cooking for about 7 hours now, and now we're ready to harvest our chiyu and finish the stock. Using a tiny ladle or spoon, skim off the chicken fat floating at the surface of the soup. If you need to, you can remove some of the chicken feet to get better access to the fat. I finally bought a fat separator here, and this came in super handy for this application. I asked Keizo why he does it like this, and he said he thinks the chiyu tastes even more chickeny if you let it cook in the soup, so that's why he does it like this. Once you have all your fat skimmed off, it's finally time to strain out your soup. Carefully strain out the soup into a second, equally big pot. And by the way, if you have room, don't throw the bones and stuff away. You can actually use this to make a niban tori python soup, so you can kind of stretch the bones even further, because 2 chickens, not the cheapest thing, right? And now you might be asking, where are the aromatics? And well, that's what we're gonna do now. So cut up half a head of Napa cabbage into 2-inch squares, 1 bulb of garlic cut in half, and 50 grams of ginger peeled with a spoon and then sliced lengthwise as thinly as you possibly can. Bring your strained soup back up to 95 degrees Celsius and then add your aromatics in there. Keep the soup above 90 degrees Celsius and steep it like that for 15 minutes and then strain it again. I've never seen an aromatics method like this, but what it did was it created an ultra fresh, crisp flavor and fragrance for the soup, and it was kind of surprising and definitely not conventional. For me, I was too tired to eat ramen that night, so I chilled the soup down overnight and then timed the dashi to be finished the next day. And this is what the soup looked like when it was chilled. This is a chintan, remind you. That's all the gelatin that had been drawn out of the chicken feet and into the stock. Okay, after all that hard work, it's finally time to put everything together. Add 100 milliliters of dashi and 200 milliliters of chicken stock into a small pot to heat up. If you're making ramen for a lot of people, you don't have to do it this way. You can feel free to just add as much soup and dashi you need into a bigger pot with the same ratios and just heat that up. Add 20 milliliters of tare and 10 milliliters of chiyu into a heated bowl. And when your soup is starting to simmer, cook your noodles. When the noodles are almost done cooking, add 300 milliliters of hot soup into your bowl. And then when your noodles are done, strain them out very well and then add them into your bowl as well. I topped with Keizo's recommended toppings of chashu, spinach, menma, green onions, agenegi, kamaboko, and nori. And finally add 5 to 10 milliliters of the shallot oil into the bowl, and I think this was actually supposed to be added earlier, but I had forgot about it, so I just added it here. It's not that big of a deal. But anyways, this was my attempt at Keizo Shimamoto's slimmed down double soup shoyu ramen recipe. And this bowl, man, for as slimmed down and cut back as the ingredients were, was still pretty damn amazing. And I know that Keizo's real classic shoyu ramen uses a lot of other ingredients. I know he likes niboshi and stuff, but if this is what his simplified version of shoyu ramen made by a kind of crappy home cook tastes like, I can't even imagine how good the real bowl of shoyu ramen at Ramen Shack made by Keizo is. It's ridiculous. This recipe takes a very long time to make from start to finish, and it's very Keizo in a sense. He's known for saying that time is the sixth component of ramen. It's just as essential as any other ingredient to make truly great ramen, and it's kind of hard to argue with him when you see the results that time can bring. My execution wasn't perfect for this bowl. I understeeped the aromatics and the katsuobushi for this batch, and the test batch was actually much better for those two things. My menma sucked balls for this one, but even with all of those mistakes, it was still a great bowl of ramen, and I think the time aspect had something to do with that. Maybe the slow development of flavors can also help to compensate for less than perfect technique. And maybe when you match that time investment with more perfect technique, that's when you get into making things that are transcendental and, you know, make people's clothes fly off and stuff when they eat your food. I don't know what I'm saying. As always, I'm just an amateur home cook who's figuring this stuff out, and maybe like in 10 years or something, or 20 years, I'll be able to design recipes in my head without even making them like Keizo did for this one. Anyways, if you're lucky enough to live in SoCal, the Ramen Shack is coming back and will be opening sometime in the next few months in San Juan Capistrano. Be sure to follow Keizo on Instagram. He's at Go Ramen for all of the updates on that shop. And when it opens, be sure to stop by. You will not regret it. That's it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching and for all the support. I cannot believe that as many people watch these videos as you guys all do, but I'm forever grateful. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.